everyone. We all welcome you to another session by Delhi Jug. And before we move forward, I would like to introduce all the leaders at Delhi Jug. Hi, my name is Mala, and I work as a developer advocate with JetBrains. I'm also an author and a Java champion. So, Vikas, next.
Hey everyone, I'm Vikas. I'm working with Cisco as technical leader, and I'm with Delhi Java user group since 2013. And I'm all excited to hear from today's guest. And over to you, Hemant.
Hi everyone, I am Hemant Gaur. I am working with Upwork as a tech lead. So anything, if you use Upwork, any job post you created, I'm the one responsible for it. And very happy to welcome you, all of you, for seriously try TDD. Hopefully we will learn a lot here. Thank you.
So, let me add our speaker to the stream now. And we are so proud, and it's a pleasure to have you, Nacho, today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hey Nacho.
Hello.
Nacho is a software engineer from Barcelona, and he works with Dynatrace. He's a fan of TDD and XP practices and has been working with Java and other web technologies for quite a long time. Also, he's the founder of Barcelona Java User Group and co-founder of JBCN Conference, the biggest Java and JVM conference in Spain. And I've had the pleasure of speaking at JBCN for the last two times. Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
And before I let Nacho take the stage, let me quickly introduce this session as well. Today, Nacho will talk about the benefits of test-driven development, understand how it works, and the benefits of using it in a more detailed approach. And of course, we would see a lot of live demonstrations by Nacho and some quick housekeeping details. Everyone who's watching the session, they can use the YouTube chat to post your questions. I, Vikas, and Hemant from the Delhi Jug would answer your questions as you post them. And Nacho would take quick breaks while presenting to you to answer the questions. So you don't really have to wait until the end of the present. The session will be recorded and hosted to the Daily Jug's YouTube channel. So, Nacho, I'll let you take the stage now.
Okay, so well, thank you very much. From my point of view, it's definitely is a pleasure to be here. So I will try to make the presentation as smooth as I can, and I will try to answer all your questions, and I hope you will learn a few things from my experience. So let me see if I guess you can see my screen, right? So let's start. Yeah. So first, I was saying thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this opportunity for me because of this situation that we are doing those days. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I hope it will be useful. What I want to share with you. So why this session? Well, I have the feeling that many people learn a few things about TDD, but there are some basic things that probably they are not really clear around it. And my explanation around it makes sense in the way of understanding why, or explaining why the benefits of building the code, let's say, guided by tests. So let's say in another way, build your test first and then write your production code later. I will try to show you an example how to do it, and I will try to just learn or show, a few tricks. And so at the end, I would like to explain a few things around TDD. So I will not just to give you small tips. So just please wait, don't run away, and I will try to make the things as smooth as I can. So yes, as Mala was saying, I'm from Barcelona. I'm a software engineer here in Dynatrace. Dynatrace is an application that basically monitors software, what the software is doing basically, and we try to gather all the information then just showing to you. And I started to write Java, I would say, a long time ago. Yes, I'm the founder of Barcelona Java User Group and the co-founder of the Java and JVM Barcelona conference. I think it's a good conference, but this is another thing we can talk about later. And yes, I was long time ago, not that long, but I was I'm a fan of them also of mountains, and I like to code and also to run through the mountains. And yes, from time to time I use Twitter for just sharing things around cloud, around TDD, around clean code, etc. And yes, probably at this point, just write any questions. As Mala was mentioning, probably later on before my live coding, I will try to answer all of your questions. Yeah, and a first warning before I start. This is everything I will show you is based on my personal experience, so it's based on what I found and what it makes me, everything that I learned from my career. So if something is not, accurate from your perspective, probably is because I haven't found the same experience as you. But yeah, I hope it will make some sense for all of you. As I mentioned, I was gonna cover a few topics here, and at the end, I will start from the very beginning, where it came from, where this TDD thing came from, the pros and cons around TDD, a bit about the process and the rules around it, and then I will cover the good habits, what I understand are good habits, and some examples or real examples to see how to do it, and then the final recap, which is basically what I think I will share, and then also a few content that probably is going to be interesting for some of you. So let's start first. When this came from, this came from the 90s, I would say. It is when this man, Ken Book, was working at Chrysler, like more than 20 years ago. It's a bit time, right, from now. And basically was based on the idea that those computers that you can see in the picture were basically using just tapes, no? And the idea, there are processes that was taking so much time to make the things happening, and at the end the process to verify that the result was correct was based in this idea of taking the input tape, manually type the output tape that you expected, and then the program until the output tape matches the expected output. It's something that you can imagine is similar around the XUnit frameworks that we have right now. No? So you have kind of an expectations, and you have an assertions, and then you can verify that those are exactly matching after when you run your test. And yes, more or less more than 21 years ago, this TDD thing became the part of this extreme programming book that was famous, designed or written by Ken Beck. Also, there is another book, this Test Driven Development by Example by Ken Beck, where it's basically explaining with, let's say, with more careful how to start with TDD and make the things happening. But first, I will just basically invite you to imagine, right? Just imagine a perfect world, right, where you're, as a software developer, you are starting a new journey, right? Like in a place where you can find defects earlier. No, when you are trying to design or run your test, you can find, let's say, defects there, no? And you basically can detect regressions, errors, and these kind of things before they happen in production, no? And at the same time, you follow a simple process that helps you to design the thing you want to develop, your software, let's say, in a straightforward way. No, it's something that is, let's say, more or less easy, and at the same time, it's going to give you those benefits. No, at the same time, imagine that this software is going to be, let's say, easy to change, easy to refactor, because all these safety nets that you've been building, no, with this process that I was mentioning, and also that are going to help you to detect some errors. Imagine that at the same time you are building, a kind of a suite of tests that's going to help you to, if something goes let's say bad, goes wrong, you can always go back and review. Okay, I was broken this. You have this test that is failing, and I can basically go back and fix it. Okay, and just change my approach. Those are some of the benefits. But at the same time, let's continue. Imagine, right? Imagine a process where your software is going to help you to understand how a consumer will use your component. A consumer, I mean somebody else that will start using your function, your classes, your libraries. Okay. Imagine that at the same time, the tests are living documentation, something that is really live, no? Something that is, you go there and you can see exactly what your software is doing, And at the same time, it's likely that your software is going to have less bugs. And also last point is that development cost is going to be lower, right? Because of these bugs. If you have less bugs, it's going to be much easier to maintain and easier to have more cost, more lower cost to maintain it at the long term, right? I put here a few references. I will share for sure later the presentation, but there are some extracts and let's say clever information that some people already had some studies around it. It makes basically totally sense to have a look, because it demonstrates that this thing about TDD makes totally sense. But yes, I'm not telling you, right, that TDD will solve all of your problems. This is true. So TDD has some benefits, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna give you all the results for you for free, and it's gonna be really everything super happy for you, and it's really really nice. Okay, there has some, let's say, bad points around it. I would say there are some. I will try to enumerate some of them, which at the very beginning is complicated, no? So everybody, I would say, it's not easy to start. There are many places where you can find content, but there is no single place where you can, I would say, start with this approach and then continue until giving you, a certain level of knowledge around TDD, and has a high learning curve. So it depends exactly of how complex is your code. If your code that you have already in production is really difficult to maintain, or your design is designed because taking into account some particular things, is not taking into account, for example, is testability in mind. Probably it's not easy to introduce TDD at this level, right? And it has to be, can be a large investment in your team, because depending on the experience in your team and how your team is eager to try to use this let's say mechanism, this paradigm to work, is going to take you a bit of time and also an effort, no? Because it's going to take you also just understand how to do it, etc. And yes, it's easy to forget. So from the perspective of applying this practice, let's say, is really easy to forget the process, how it's working, and how you can manage it. And especially if you're in an environment where the team is, let's say, is really eager to maintain this habit, it's going to be difficult to maintain it. And at this point, people make, it provokes resistance for some people that doesn't like the idea, and it can be corrupted to the syndrome of, okay, we have to reach a particular level of code coverage because this is going to help us to maintain the code, the sanity of the code correct, right? And at this, if you have a look on all these particular problems, at the end, it's extremely difficult to master it. So you have to understand how to try the mechanism and make it in production just with code in production every single day is really difficult, depending on the things that I've mentioned. So probably many of you will say, okay, I still don't understand how to do this and what it means, right? And I will try to just use a picture for explaining how I can see it. No, so probably many of you learned how to write code time ago. And yes, but imagine that you are now, let's say, a bit older, and you try to drive a different bike, a different bicycle. Probably it's kind of going to be a bit difficult for you. It's like learning a new, and in a different way. It's going to be, okay, I understand how to use it, but probably this is not exactly for me. This is more or less the reaction that I probably find in many teams when we try to apply TDD, because you learn to write production code, and then we are going to do it in the other way around. Just instead of writing the production code, then writing the test, just doing it in the way around is like driving this bicycle. It's not going to make the things, okay, this is not really suitable for me, right? But this is not exactly the point about TDD. TDD is a particular tool set, I would say, that is going to help you to design and build code, and it's kind of introducing a process that is going to help you to build more modules or just components in your projects that are going to help you to be isolated and really well tested in independence. So you will try to, let's say, make the things isolated in that way, or make the things that could be isolated in that way, and then you can basically put the components connected. But based on this approach that is TDD, you will see how to isolate those and how to cover by tests while you are working with them. But yes, as everybody knows, these things is going to be difficult. But at the same point, everybody knows where the magic happens, when you have to go outside of your comfort zone and kind of break your rules and think outside, right? This is exactly where I would like to explain you why it is so cool, right? Because the thing is, when you leave your comfort zone, then the magic happens. So yeah, let's move to the next step, which is basically explaining the process. For the ones that probably are using TDD, this image probably is really you're really used to it. But for the newcomers, I will basically explain it. It's not really difficult, but there are those 3 steps. Nothing more for TDD. It's really, let's say, summarize it is really easy. It's really this. So those 3 steps are really easy to understand. Basically, you have to start writing a test and see this test is failing. Okay, it's just this red step that you can see, the number 1. But the number 2 that you want to do is basically write just enough code in production that's going to help you to make this test that is in red, move it to green. Okay, so this step is just make the minimum one to make the test pass to green. And the third one is to see the code that we have already there, if we can improve it somehow without changing the behavior. So basically it's the refactoring step. Basically those three steps are the steps for TDD. And at the end, it's like, okay, let's specify what we want to code. This is the first step, which is writing a test that is failing. This red step. Is basically say, this is what I want to achieve. The second one is create just enough code to satisfy this thing that we want to let's say fix or want to implement. The red one we want to move it to green. And the third one is to, let's say, the picture that we have already in our code, can we clean it somehow? Can we remove some duplication? Can we make it better somehow? This is more or less the explanation about this process of TDD. Probably many of you may know Robert C. Martin, really well famous as Uncle Bob, and he explained, let's say, the process with different rules. So are they really similar, but I'll say it in another way. So in first step, probably you will understand that based on this approach, that basically I have to write the test and then write the production code. Say it another way, you are not allowed to write production code, right, until it is really required to cover a test that is failing. So say it another way, you have to focus first on building tests, right, that will help you to demonstrate the behavior that you want. It's basically try to the test is going to help you to drive the code that you want to do in production. If you want a new behavior, you have to write a new test, and then you can write the production code. Another of the rules that Robert C. Martin explained was you are not allowed to write any more than a unit test is sufficient to fail. It makes totally sense in the terms of, okay, we will have to start writing the test, but we cannot write very much apart from a unit test. So it means that tests has to be first class, so it has to be citizens from, let's say, from all the components that we have already in the production code, but at the same time they have to be already clever, they have to be really well maintained, they have to be, let's say, easy to understand and easy to change. Those are the things that probably many of us, at least in my career, I found in that tests are really not really well maintained, and this is really interesting in this point. And the last rule is about you are not allowed to write more production code that is sufficient to pass. So basically, no over-engineering, simple code, make the solution work, and just make the test pass. Okay, nothing really complex. Let's say, is saying in another way how I explained it before. Let's say the simple process that is TDD. Okay, so let's move to the what I found good habits, and then I will wait. I will go then later on to a live coding session. So let's just continue with the habits. So some of them are based, as I mentioned, in my experience, but as we have right now, good habits that we have, for example, clean or wash your hands more frequently than before. I will suggest a few things probably that could help you to understand why TDD makes total sense. So the first thing is if you want to write production code, first try verify that your test is failing, because from time to time there are people that write code in production, but at the same time they didn't realize that this functionality is already covered by a test. So say in another way, probably this functionality is already, or this behavior is already covered by a test. So the first step is basically see that the test is failing, and then you can write, or I will recommend you to write the production code. Another simple thing that probably many of you have found in many places, that you could imagine that if a test has only one reason to fail, it's going to be much easier to maintain, much easier to understand how to save it and how to change it, right? This is one of the important thing around working with tests that are really first class, let's say first citizens. And the last one is write the assertion phase, and you will see in the demo how to do it. Another thing that is gonna, at least for me, is helping me a lot to let's say have a common sense and common idea when I'm working in a team, how we are describing the test and how we understand each other. How we can write, let's say, the next step, the next test, or the next class is to have a common understanding, a common naming convention around how to write tests and which name we would like to use. And as you can see here, my tests are ending with should, and you will start thinking, why are you doing this, Nacho? Why are you ending this class with should? Okay, it's a bit tricky, but at the end is really easy. It's basically to force you as a developer to start the next thing that you have to do is to write an action. If you read the name of the class, you will see this session replay thing should should what? Should do something, no? Should verify anything, should fail, should return. Those are the behaviors that I expect I would like to see in the name of the test. That's why this naming thing around should and the expectation, the behavior that I want on the name of the method is really interesting. And in this perspective, I can basically describe the behavior, not the internals of the test. And also, it's going to help me a lot to describe, let's say in plain English, what is happening with those tests. So the result is that basically those tests is going to help you to understand much better the focus on the business. If you basically collapse everything and you read only the method of the test, you will see that the behavior is really clear. So the tests are really clever. Instead of describing the internals, I'm basically focused on the behavior of this class is holding, let's say. Of course, if something is failing, I can go deep into the details and see why this method is failing, but we don't need to go if you don't want it. So those particular things is going to help me to promote describing much better the behavior instead of doing the details about doing things like checking nulls and these kind of things. So do it in another way is going to help me to understand if I want to throw an exception or another exception. I don't need to change the name of the test. Right? If I want to change the exception that is throwing in any of the fails that we have right now, I can do it without changing the name of the method, which is, in my opinion, really interesting because I don't want to change the name of the test if something I want to, change the name of the exception. Continue with the habits. I will recommend you to follow the next approach to explain how to write a test in the order, which is basically something that probably many of us are not doing in the same way, but yeah, this is something that is working for me. So, as you may know, I start working with just naming the class of the test with this should that I mentioned, and then I create the method. No, and the things that I want to implement. This is the thing. The next thing I want to implement this state that when in this case, for example, when I don't have beacons received, because let's imagine a beacon, a particular piece of information that I'm receiving in a particular piece of software. And then I'm going to return an empty state. No, this is the expectation that I want, and the verification, the functionality that I want to implement. The next step is go to the assertion. This is what we want to check. Why? Because basically, after understanding or describing the method, the next step is define what we want to check. It's basically, okay, this is the behavior we want. The next step is how we are going to verify. Okay, this is one of the ways to do it. Is basically go directly to the assertion and do it in that way. Then the step is going a bit up. Is basically okay. The compilation, and at that point I'm writing, let's say this class, this line. The compiler will tell me, hey, Nacho, I don't know anything about this state, and neither about this previous state. No problem. I'm going to trigger this code, and then I'm going to, let's say, build everything that I need for going to that direction. It's basically, okay, state is going to be the result of the method that I want to trigger, and the previous state is going to be, I will say, the one that I want to do before. So basically, it's something that I need to set up to configure that to see that my test is working. Basically, as you can see, the process is going from the bottom, let's say, going up. It's basically what I want to demonstrate is the name of the test. The verification is the last, let's say, the last sentence, and then I'm going up, just describing this variable, what it is. This is the result of running this code with this particular parameter, and those parameters are coming from this particular scenario. In this case, basically defining this situation, this setup that are appearing in different lines. Okay. And yeah, how to start? You will ask yourself. Well, starting with TDD is not so easy. And as I mentioned, so I will always recommend to start with little things. No, to start with katas, with proof of concept, personal projects where you can basically get into this, get into the idea of practicing and understanding how it works, and then continue it, let's say, slowly, one by one, until finally you internalize it. Of course, I can recommend you to check online content. There are a lot of katas and exercises you can find, and of course, if you can find somebody who could practice this, and then I will basically recommend you to do pair programming. So pair programming, for the one that doesn't know anything about pair programming, is basically sit down, or well, at least virtually nowadays, but you have to, let's say, be on the same page, let's say, sharing the screen in those cases, and two people are on the same screen, just understanding how to approach to a particular implementation, a particular thing that you want to cover. And the idea is the one person has the responsibility to write code, but the other person is the navigator, the observer, the people the colleague that is reviewing the code that is typing in. So, for example, you be careful because you have driving this in this direction. We are gonna the one, let's say the difference of the roles are basically one is driving the car, for example, in this case, and the other one is just showing how to drive to the particular place. So basically, one is the strategic one, and the other one is the tactical, right? So, and the idea is that this behavior where you have somebody else with you going in the same direction, because both of you are going to, let's say, build the software as soon as you can, in the best quality as you can. This idea is going to improve your code. So basically, it's going to be in this back. The idea of these two roles is basically to give you the freedom to think in one role where we are going to do next, and the other one is going to be always focused on building the solution that we have, or the data we have right now. And the idea is that this situation will make the things make it much faster in terms of doing the same thing, but do it in let's say as a pair. And this idea basically is to be able to switch these roles from time to time. And basically, with this idea of back and forth between test and code, for example, or where from time to time, I don't know, every single hour or something like this, they will enrich you in the terms of how you're writing code and how your colleague is gonna solve that code or solve the next iteration. And this idea, we're gonna write this, let's say, this feedback loop that you have is gonna improve the code or the result of the code that you are doing. Because basically, when your colleague will start doing the things in another way, probably you have to arrive in a conclusion where say, okay, Nacho, probably if you follow the convention that we are using before, probably we can go in that direction, or you can use this shortcut. Have you seen how I do these kind of things with Git? Probably you can do the same thing. And this back and forth will gonna give you a better understanding of how to do this kind of thing, and also to practice TDD and go in the good way, right? So at this point, I don't know if there is any questions, because if not, I'm gonna move to the example. No questions from now, I guess.
Vikas, you're muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. So yes, Nacho, we have a couple of questions. Vikas would ask the questions to you.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we have lots of questions in the chat, and yeah, let me pick the first one. Raghavan wants to know, like, what is the combination of TDD with the BDD, and do you really see the perceivability of the combo, or we keep these two separate, TDD and BDD?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. So the point about TDD normally is that it tries to explain I would say in business level, no, all the descriptions, all the scenarios, and all the behavior around the system. And then you normally go deep into the different, let's say, APIs or places, and then you basically realize normally with Gherkin, no, all these steps, and then you go through the different APIs and then start to building all of these things. So you can do both things at the same time, because BDD will help you to explain all the scenarios, all the cases from the business perspective, but how to translate those into the different components that you have to build. Imagine, for example, navigating through a particular application where you have to retrieve information from different components, different services that provides different information based on different parameters. These are things that you might need TDD for that. So probably you might need some BDD stuff for Gherkin for explaining a complex scenario when I visit, I don't know, a place from a particular website. I would like to see all the lists that I have in my checkout, for example, or in my basket. But where those elements came from is something that you might probably need from retrieving from a service. And those are things that you probably might need to use TDD for, describing all of these things and explaining all the different situations. What happens if the elements doesn't have, for example, a valid description? What happens if I don't have a particular price? Those things are the different subsets of the scenarios that you might need to use TDD for that.
Great, thank you. There is one more question. Like, I think it is more towards where should we create a test suite based on a particular feature or behavior, or like we should aim for the complete suite itself? What should be the approach?
So so building, let's say on it doesn't matter also, by the way, if you are on the front end or back end side. So basically you can apply TDD and define your behaviors in tests, which is basically you can use, in fact, acceptance test driven development, which is basically an approach between using Gherkin and using TDD. And basically with that approach, you can basically trigger from the outside of your system a particular, let's say, example that can trigger the development that you have, let's say, in the internals of your system. So I will probably in the demo, you will see something that could match this approach. But basically the idea is that you don't need to start with a feature. So you don't know exactly where to put, let's say, the feature. You might need probably to scratch something a bit and see, okay, for example, I don't know where I get the information from these locations in the website. So probably I need to understand first how to retrieve the information from different places. And when I have more or less the idea of the components, then I can start writing a feature saying, okay, this information, I'm gonna put this in this place in this website. Probably I need to, let's say, name it as the component that retrieves the list of products from the website is going to get the information from a database. So then I realized that I need to describe the feature as a behavior. Okay, this service will retrieve information, and this information is the one I'm going to render in the website. So I can see this feature split it, no, as a description of those two behaviors in different components.
Okay, got it. So one more, it is like, I think it's my question. So I want to learn, like, usually we work in the projects where things are doing, someone is doing in a way. So how you will recommend, like, if it's an ongoing project, if we want to introduce TDD in that, what is the right approach to do that?
That's a good question. Normally, it's really tough because depending on how old normally the project is really equivalent to how difficult it is to test. No, is normally, because though many projects are really complex in terms of the dependencies that they are linked to one component to another, and how difficult it is to split those dependencies and make the things happening without the things that you don't need for building a particular thing. So in those cases, it's a bit difficult to introduce TDD because majority of the code probably is even not covered by tests. So my recommendation in those cases is to start small. Start with something that you can do in a particular class that you already know. Let's say the behavior that you already have. And probably with the ones that you already own, you can start saying, okay, I am the owner of this class. I already know what I can do with this class. But probably what about writing with tests and then cover all the behavior by the different functionalities? I recommend normally to start out of the projects that you have been working in production because it's, let's say, it's more safety. No, you have a more comfortable way where you are in a personal project and you break something. Okay, it doesn't, it's not a problem at all. Your boss is not going to come, on Friday night saying, hey, because something is not working in production, sorry, man. But those things happen, and you don't know exactly when you're changing some dependencies or some components on an interface. So those things are when you are really confident, I would say, with your code, that you have a kind of a safety net where you can change everything that you want. You are really free to introduce TDD. But if not, you might need some techniques and understand a bit I would say a lot about refactoring things and removing dependencies, introducing seams, a really nice technique by Michael Feathers, by the way, which basically means to change the behavior of a component that is in production without changing the component in production. So those are things that you need a bit of knowledge to do these kind of things, but there are techniques to use, as one that I mentioned. And also doing in the real production code is not that easy sometimes. So yeah, I would say that it takes time, but my suggestion is always start small, start with somebody else, probably in a pet project or something that you can basically understand the flow and do it in one by one slowly. And then when you're confident enough and you've been working a lot from then try to make it in small places in your code, in production, in your nowadays, and then you will see some benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Nacho. I think those were all questions. Hemant or Mala, if you have any, you ask. Otherwise, we'll continue with the session.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we are good to let Nacho continue with the session because we do have a lot of questions, but we would like him to complete the presentation first.
Okay,
Okay.
let's continue then.
All right.
Yes.
So yeah. So
Nacho, one quick housekeeping thing. So could you click on the hide
oh yeah,
text?
sure.
Yes. Perfect.
My
Thank
fault.
you. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move to the example, to the live coding I was mentioning before. So the first thing is I always warn everybody, it's going to be live coding, so it means if something is not going to work, just, well, live coding is those things that happen. So yeah, but I'm not, I'm a brave developer. I will try to do the thing. So let's do the things and see how it works. I hope it will work really, really, really nice. So let's imagine we are, let's say, in a company that basically they are focused on selling and renting films out over the internet, right? Something that is really, really new. Nobody is doing it right nowadays. Okay, and yeah, imagine that we have our product owners. They are saying, okay, we want to add new functionalities in a particular place. Let's call a service that allows to recommend films to the users that we have in the platform. Okay, and basically the requirements are here on the right. You can see it, I hope, very well. But basically the idea is to build a service that returns a list of films that are associated with a particular genre, right? So let's say imagine science fiction, I don't know, animation, whatever, adventures, and by default the result that they have to be ordered by an according average rate, no, that the users are given to the film. So basically, as a user, I will rate the film a particular number, and then what we want is just ping, just ask to the service, give me the more rated films by this particular genre, no, and the film should contain at least just title, year, when it was published, tags, and more values like the genres, no, a list of genres, because probably just one for a particular film will not be enough. And yeah, that's the idea. So let's go. I'm gonna open my favorite IDE, and yeah, let's start. So probably I hope that this new project will basically leave me everything. So we mentioned this is, I'm gonna go back a bit just to understand. This is a film, I would say film recommendation service. No, this is the name of the something like this, recommendation service. Let's do like this. And let's see, yes, it's using the size, the font size that we were expecting. So the first thing is gonna wait a bit until Gradle gets the dependencies. I guess many of you are really familiar with this. But the second thing I normally do is basically I try to switch those dependencies, because from my perspective, those are well, not exactly the ones that I would like. So I normally try to use the dependencies I use normally, and I will remove those that are here. Nothing really fancy. Basically, let me show you. What I do is basically define some versions of the JUnit and Mockito, and basically I try to use those and include a particular library for assertion that I'm really used to it and I like it very much. So yeah, nothing really fancy. But let's start with the demonstration just using the first class. So as we are in Delhi, right? So let's do it like this. Let's start with Delhi Jack, and how is the name of the, how we say it, film service, right? So let's call it, give me 1 second. Yeah. So film service, film recommendation service, film recommendation service. How I can name that test? Probably many of you have been attending the presentation, so probably this is the name that we would like to choose, right? The shoot that I mentioned before. So now I'm going to split that and make the things much better for able to read it. And we start. Oh, I did it wrong. So basically, this is the test. Okay. So I only want to do this generate. Why? Why is not getting the dependencies? Yes, why not? Those are dependencies. This is the test. Let's start with the first thing. Make the testing. The existing library is not found. What is not found? It's here. Oh, come on. Build.gradle. Dependencies of JUnit are here. Let me import the Gradle thing again. Let me compile. Let me see now. It's not using it. I don't understand. Let me see now. Nope, says that it's not used. Oh, those beautiful things. Why those things happen during the day? Um,
Nacho, if you click on the fix button, wouldn't
mhm.
that fix it? Because you see the
Yeah,
error
let
which
me
says
see.
fix it. Yes, that should fix it.
Well, I think instead of but I'm using Gradle, so it's a bit weird,
Ah, okay,
because I was defining dependencies here, right?
right, right.
And you can see those are the dependencies I was using. And normally, what I do is just create the dependencies, just in Gradle to download everything, and just the code should basically recognize that. But let's remove those. Let me see. Those are, let's say, solved by IntelliJ. You know more than me, IntelliJ, by the way. So no. So I don't know why it's not recognizing the dependency. But basically, this module is basically built on top of JUnit. Um, I don't know why, to be honest. Let me do that in one second. I will start again. So Java, Gradle, yes.
Vikas, you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I always forget it. I thought like yeah, some suggestions in the chat, like restart the ID. I think that
Ah,
is
let me see. Oh, look, I haven't done anything from now. And as you can see now, the suggestion is already, right? So magic happens when you close and open the things. This is the majority of the things that happening. So thank you very much. So now we can start basically. And now, so let's go back because probably many of you don't remember now. So the purpose of this kata basically is my own kata, by the way. Many people told that there are many katas around it, but many of those katas are don't focus on something that we can use in production. And I thought, okay, we can do something that could make sense and do it in something that could make production safe. No, and this is the way. So the field recommendation service is gonna use a service, right, and retrieve a list of fields by a particular genre, and then return order by a particular average rate. Okay, more or less. I think it's more or less great. So let's start with as a film recommendation service. The film recommendation service should do what? As I have this return. This should here. I'm already forced to start with an action. I will write something like this: return films by genre, right? And I will say that they have to be ordered, sorry, by average rate. Right? Yeah, I think something like this should work. And then I want to start with the first thing that I mentioned before. What I want to do is to assert, right? Because this is the first thing that I would like to do. As I mentioned as a tip, I start with the assertion, but I don't have anything. But what I know is that I want to, let's say that the films that I would like to return from the service, so something like film service, when it is called, let's say, films by average rate, right? So this is the method I'm gonna, let's say, build, and I'm gonna pass a method, sorry, a genre that could be science fiction, right? This is the example, in fact, that I have in the presentation. Then I wanna basically assert something that will be equal to the expected field. And you will say, naturally, you are writing things that are not already here. That's exactly the point. So I'm going to create this field right now. This service is going to be our own field service, right? I'm going to not the shoot. Let's do it again. I think yeah, like this, right? So IntelliJ don't know how to complete that. Yes, thank you. And basically what I want to do now is to, now because I was accepted. So now what I want to do is basically, because everything is in red, right? What I want to do is to create that. I don't want to do that in the test code because this has to be production code. So let me see if that will put that in production. No, let's move to the production, but this is the production code, right? So I'm gonna move it to the production side. And basically what I want to do now, right, I have the film service I'm going to use, and basically this film service is not initialized. Let's start initializing it, because more or less I think I'm done with this test. So this test is going to help me to verify this verification, this feature. And as you can see, so my fingers today are not really nice, but sorry about that. But the thing is that, as you can see, the ID is telling me, okay, Nacho, you already created this film service, but I don't know anything about this film by average rate. That's exactly what I want. I want to drive this situation, and then I would like to define this method, right, that will return a list of films ordered, right, by a specific average rate. And what I want to have here is basically the genre, right? So let me show you at the same time how the things are gonna let's say evolve. So let me go back. Where is here? Here we have our test, right? And here down you will see the production code. It's still the code is not even, it doesn't compile, so basically it's not finished, it's not end. So this method is not finished because here you can see I don't have the film already. So basically this film, I need to create that class, right? Because otherwise how we're going to return anything. And the list already is also not imported. So basically let's import that. Yeah, and basically now I'm going to basically have the signature of the method, and then I'm going to go and define the test. Basically arrive to the definition of the expected things. So this variable, basically expected things, it has to be really a list of things, right? And basically do the same thing. So I have to define something here and build that. Otherwise, how we're going to demonstrate that it is working, right? Or at least a rises list, right? I think so. Come on. Yes. And now I would like to, let's say, build some films, right? I'm a fan of many films, but for this particular scenario, I will use let's say two. That is how to call that? Well, let's start first. So for the first thing, what I want to do is basically define two films that could help me just to understand that everything is let's say working. And in the example, let's say the product owner say, okay, a film should contain at least title, a year, one or more tags, and also the genre. So for not doing that, let's say too long for all of you, I have here some scratch. That's by the way, a really nice feature. And basically what I want to do is to basically define those things, right? So these are the films that I would like to introduce for you. It is not something really fancy. Basically, I'm creating two elements here. You can see Matrix here and Star Wars here. And as you can see, we will have some values. Those values are really the ones that I will demonstrate later on. But basically, they have an ID, the title, the year that it has been published. Those are the tags, for example, and those are the genres, right? And I have another one. This is Star Wars, the first episode. Really nice, by the way, those two movies. And the idea is that they use those variables, if you can lead me. And basically, because I don't want to spend too much time to doing these kind of things, because basically those are final constants that I can use here in my methods, in my test, and then I will is those to introduce it here, right? Instead of doing it manually, just basically to save some time for the demo. So now I'm gonna the compiler is telling me, okay, Nacho, you don't have anything related with film that is created that is using these values, and what I want to do is basically to do it now. So this is the title, and this has to be the year, right? The year that has been published, and these are the tags, right? And those are the genres. So I'm gonna not throwing an exception, and this is the constructor. And if I'm not wrong, this is a string, Nacho, come on. And this other is a string also, yep. So now what I'm gonna do is basically create a constructor and assign a values. Those fields basically assign to those values that is I'm gonna do by the ID instead of doing it by myself. And basically here, what I want to do is basically to use the cost that I've been using here, I define it here and put it here, right? Because basically those are the constants I defined it already, Matrix and Star Wars. And I hope that those are the results that when I call this method will return that this result is exactly the one that I expect. So now I'm going to start running the test, and the test will tell me, what do you think what happened? Will happen. Basically, that this is going to throw an exception, right? So this method that I wrote here is not implemented at all. And in fact, I'm throwing this exception, okay? So in this way, let's imagine based on what the TDD process does, is basically says, okay, naturally you have already a failed test, but you have to always go to green side, no? And how to, but at the same time, there are things that normally you have to think of it, how I can go to the green side, but at the same time, I would like to evolve something, because if I return these two values here, now as a list here, bam, my test is done and my implementation is finished. But this is not gonna help me to promote and to add value in production, because basically it's gonna return always this list of films. And this is not something that's gonna work for anything. So now I have to think a bit how I'm gonna compose or design my solution using whatever I need to build something that is going to be useful for production purposes. And in this case, I have to think a bit how I can find films and use something to get those films, return it in the particular order, and you know, the average that we have to recognize, and then return it back to the user. So at this point, probably you might notice that I'm a service, and what we can use for returning data from somebody else, in this case can be a database, then I can probably use a repository, right? So my idea is to use a repository, because it's basically the component that normally gets information from a central place, database in this case, and then again ping that the repository, launch a query, and then go the result, get the information back to the service. And then in this case, it's something I think as a design make these things work, and I can use it as a value in this case to run something and can return the value that I expect and then order the things I expected. So why not? So let's start doing these kind of things, implementing the result. And in this case, I'm gonna, as I mentioned, use a repository, and I can do something like this. So I'm gonna define this component that's gonna help me to find the films, but I'm gonna create something like this. And at the same time, I'm solving the scenario of this test, but at the same time, designing how I want to approach this solution. In this case, I want to use something like this, and I need something, no, for key, because here probably this method is going to be used by a sorting order, but probably in some case I would like to use it in another way around. So probably something like this is gonna is gonna help me in the future. This is really not needed for solving this test, but I think it makes sense. So I'm gonna create this field, right? That is the film repository. Right. And now let's create that class. Yes, here, wrote something here, sorry. And then at the same time as we did before. So this find genre is not existing, and this sort order neither is not existing. So we're going to create this sort order class. It's not a class. We're going to be probably an enum. And then in this enum, I'm going to create this constant. Yeah. So here, whoop. Let's go back for a second. Constant, enum constant, right? Yes, much better. And now here, what I want to say is basically delegate this method, right? To this logic around finding something on the repository. The repository is going to give me the information, right? To create that and let's say find information in the correct order and do it in the way that I expect. So in that way, what I want to do in this sort order has to be the sort order, right? So this is the method I'm going to create, and let's do one more time, let's run the test. Everything is working as expected, right? So an exception is already thrown because basically this implementation is already not working, right? But now I already know that I have this piece of information, this repository, and I can use it from this film service. This is our idea. But as you can see, that the test is not working because this method is already throwing an exception. So now we can think about a bit and see, okay, Nacho, but now you can return again the two elements that you have on your list, on your method of test, and say, look, this is the result of the films that you already know, and then the implementation is done. No, what we want to do right now is basically building this test that is already giving us, driving the direction of building something, is gonna helping us, to demonstrate how to build all the different components. So now I have a different component that is the film repository. And we have a different method, which is basically the one that is going to give us the information from the database. It's going to retrieve information from the database and then give it back to the service, right? But at the same time, we are mixing. So we are using this component to go to the database. And at this point, the question is, do we want, from the unit test perspective, to run a unit test that is also using a connection to the real database, and therefore just be able to connect to the database in the unit test? My reply normally is no. Try to minimize the number of dependencies and connecting to a database is also a dependency. So do not connect to a database, in my opinion, in a unit test, because it will make the things slower and really complicated to maintain. How we can do that? So basically, at this level, what we can do is basically use this film repository, as we are doing right now, but also to use it and inject it on the film service, because otherwise we are not using it at all. So let's do it like this. So let's connect the repository here as a film. This has to be the film repository, right? And at this level, as you can see, the ID is telling me, okay, you don't have anything related with this constructor. And what we can do is basically to assign, right, to the same level. At the same time, I'll introduce the dependency and assign it from the constructor. So nothing really fancy. Basically, now I'm not using anything here. And basically, because this instantiation I'm doing here, I have a null. So basically, the test is not working at all. Okay, it's still the approach is correct. What we want to do right now is to, instead, as I mentioned, we don't want to connect to a database. What we want to say is, imagine I'm connected to a database. This test should pass, right? So how I can do this is imagine. So when I can see imagine, I always try to translate this to something that I need to mock, right? So this is something I normally do with Mockito. And that's one of the extensions, dependencies I introduced. So basically, what I want to do is to define this as a mock, right? And what I want to do is basically here, when the film service, or when the film repository is called the film repository, and this should be imported, right? So the film repository is called by genre, and which genre? There has to be this one, right? The film, the science fiction that we already know, it has to be the genre, exactly. Oh, you were doing right, intelligent. And when I'm doing like this, right, what I want to say is when this is called, and by the order that I already defined there, what I want to do is to return the expected films, right? So what do you think will happen right now? So now the test is working. Why? Well, basically because I mock the dependency with the repository here, and I'm saying when this method is called, I'm going to return this expected film, which basically is nothing really fancy. I'm saying, okay, when the film repository is called incorrect, as I expected, and return the list I already have here. This is nothing really complex in this stage, but this method, imagine this method right now helped me to introduce a few classes and a constant, etc. But now I have another method here, and I can basically see the relationship with the repository in a service, and I can do whatever I can with all of them. And right now, what I want to do is to just continue with the implementation. What I can do right now here for the film repository to implement this, basically create a test, right? Probably many of you will do that. But in this case, I don't want this film repository to end as a should. You probably may notice that I haven't renamed that, but I want to run a different test, because what I want to do is basically to run an integration test. And why I want an integration test here in a unit test? Basically because for implementing that, probably I need to connect to a real database and get the information from a real database, right? So for doing that, I'm gonna try to do it with another dependency. So let's see if now this is gonna work. In my case, I'm going to use test containers. I will explain a little bit about it, but basically, let me see if now the dependencies are going to download it properly, and if I can do it now. But before just running the test, I'm gonna create the same thing again, which is basically define the test first. So in that case, the repository is gonna return the films, right? Filtered, because I need to filter by genre, right? And ordered by average rate. I hope it is clear that I'm not going to use a unit test here, because that's why the name is different. And at this point, what I want to do is basically use the film repository, right? Oh, sorry, my fault. So let's start, as I mentioned. We have to start first with the assertion, right? So what I want to do is basically to identify how the result that I expect that they are going to be the ones that and for this, if you don't mind, and you can give me the opportunity, I'm going to use the same that I have here, right? And what I want to do is basically to move it to another place, because otherwise then basically I want to use it. So in this case, I'm going to use film object model, which is basically normally a pattern where I would say it's normal to use it. And normally I will just move it like this. Yes, I want to create that class for me. And basically in that way, basically what I did is those constants are already there. And here. I don't know why it's not already recognized. Let me have a second. Oh, I move it in the correct place, incorrect place, my fault. So now this class, now it's working. So basically, this class right now contains the constant, right? And just nothing really fancy, but the only thing that I want is basically be able to use it here. What I want is basically when I call this film repository, and I use the method that I already know, I'm gonna return the values that I expect. So let me start using this variable here. It has to be the film repository, right? And what I want to do is basically when the film repository, I'm gonna use it with science fiction, and I'm gonna use it as a sort order, the same one. Oh, come on. Order. It's not enabled or what? It's not initialized? Yes, please, come on, no problem. This is the genre, I don't know. Because I closed here, my fault. And here, what I want to do is basically to sort in that way, you know? And what I want to do is basically to equals to what? To the ones that we already know, that are the matrix one and the other one. So as I did before, I can do expected films, and basically just create this local field that has to be, as you already know, something like this, and this can be and use it as an array list, right? To do it really fast. I hope I'm able to do it much faster, but so in object model matrix now. Nothing really fancy, right? I'm creating those things. I'm going to run this test and see what it happens. It's going to fail, I hope, because basically this method is I'm not implementing anything really new, right? But what I said is basically I want to implement that, and this is going to be a real integration test, and I want to use that for connecting to a real database, okay? For doing that, I mentioned I introduced a dependency for test containers, which is basically a library that can help you to create a Docker container, run it in your local machine, and put it everything that you need, and then go and throw it back when you're basically running on your integration test or unit test. In this case, I'm gonna try to let's say build the container, and from doing that, I hope there will be something like this that could work. Basically, this is the setup that I need for running this on test containers, and basically I will explain it a bit what it's doing. Basically, I'm going to create this container with this particular image of Docker image, which is basically Postgres. I'm gonna use this script. I'm going to explain you in a bit, and basically we're going to set up everything and get this data source as the test container explains, and then I'm going to try to using it later on here. But for doing that, as you can see here, I need something that is the structure where I will find the database, right? The structure of the database. In this case, this is the structure that I designed something like this, right? So there are many ways of solving this particular functionality, but you can do it something like this. I create few tables. One is films, another one is user, another are ratings, right? And basically for that, I have different users here, 1, 2, and 3, John, Michael, Luke, and I have different films. Basically, those films are going to help me to do the things that I would like to do, basically, which is filtering by a particular genre, order by a particular average. And then I have those films here. You can see Matrix, you can see Star Wars here, and another one here, just to be able to recognize that the filtering is working, right? And the last one is the average. So as you can see here, we have the user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think, no, this is the film, sorry. And then you can see here different users are rating as 8 point, I don't know, 8.3, 8 point, something like this. No, the Matrix one. This one is the Star Wars, I guess. Yes, 4, 5 exactly. So Star Wars has a 7, and we have this one that is Up, but Up has a 9. But it's a 9. But as you can see here, Up is not a science fiction movie. That's why we don't have it right now here as a list of values. Okay. So now what I'm gonna do is basically I'm gonna use this as a script that is going to be used by Docker container, by test container, sorry, and it's going to be used as a data. I'm going to populate to this database, and when I'm going to use it, when I'm going to return this data, I'm going to be able to get it as I expected. So then I need to use it like this, right? So I need to use it like as a parameter, as a constructor on the data source, and then use it here in my basically class. So I'm going to create that field. I'm going to use it here. And as you can see, nothing has been changed here. So let me run the test again. Basically, I introduce a data source for being able to connect to the database, right? But I'm not using it at all. So basically, the result, as you can see, the test is going to take a bit of time, It's going to creating a new Docker container is going to be running. It's going to populate it with the data I already showed you. But basically, the result is the same. I haven't done anything, right, for solving that. Well, I introduced a dependency, and now I can use it for getting the information from the database with this data source, and then get the information from the data source as I expected. But now I don't want to disturb you too much time, and I think it makes no sense to spend too much time, but I will explain what I'm going to do. This is the implementation of one of the implementations where you can use to return this value, which is basically connect to the database and run a query where you can basically using a particular genre and basically get the films that are already in the ratings and are already rated by different users. Basically, I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna get the average rate and gonna return it. And basically, this method here is basically run the query. I'm gonna basically get all the results, and when I have a result, basically I'm gonna read every result and do return as a list of films. So basically, it's nothing really fancy. It's JDBC from the 90s, I would say. And basically, this is the film that we already know. No, I'm going to get every single column from the table that has the films. I'm going to return all of this as a list of films. And basically, this method is going to return this. So basically, I don't want to spend too much time on this. And if you don't mind, I'm going to copy this. And let's see if this is going to work. Because basically, this should be the implementation of this method. Right? So let me see if the method is more or less similar. Yes, it is. So basically, I know I'm doing a trick, but it's not that trick, right? Basically, this is the implementation of getting information from the database, map it to every single record with this method, right? And then get it back and return it back. So let's run the test again and see what is happening. Because now I am running an integration test with a particular implementation. And basically, now the test is saying, okay, Nacho, I was expecting something, but it's not equal what I was looking for. Okay, probably this makes sense because I don't have anything here on the film side, right? So I don't. The film doesn't know how to compare one to each other. So let's see if we can fix that. Just basically saying to our objects how we can compare one to the others, right? Which is basically implementing the equals method, and also, well, the hash code is really recommended. And lastly, just in case that I want to see a beautiful comparison error, and now let's see if this is working. So now I had, yes, so the method is working. Basically, the implementation of this film repository is working. And as you can see, the test is, the integration test is working. So basically, what I have right now is, this is the integration test of the film, and this is the unit test of the service. So basically, I have two components, a repository and a service that are connected, and are already verified that are working. Not only this, if I try to go here and run this with code coverage, where are you? I cannot see it. So that's why I can use this beautiful thing. So I can do this with coverage, right? So film with coverage, yep. And you will see why this is really amazing, because I already implemented, right, only one feature, which is basically getting information from a particular service. But the good and the beautiful thing of the implementation that we did using TDD is basically 100% of the implementation is more or less covered by test. So yes, the film is not already covered, but you can see how the film is. The film doesn't have any knowledge around it right now, because it's basically the one I'm using for getting the information. So basically, nothing really complex to implement here. Basically, I'm implementing an equals, the hash code, and the toString. But from the perspective of the business, the repository and the service is about 900% of them is already covered by this, which is completely crazy. We implemented something, we get some business logic from the service and also from the repository, and at the same time, all the code, let's say, is covered by test. And this is the end of my presentation. Let's say let's finish with the last slide with the recap and the summary. And if you have more questions, I will happy basically to answer all of them. But I will recommend you to basically of course to read a lot, and I will recommend you those 3 books. From my perspective, those 3 that are here are really I would say really easy to manage, really easy to understand. I would say the first one, Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Test, is really to put you in TDD, how to learn, how to understand and apply it in a, I would say, complex, not complex, but from the beginning to a really more complex things. The second one, the TDD, so the art of unit test, is more focused for C# or C developers, but I would say that it's really easy to read. I'm not sure about the naming things of the method, but this is another thing. The test drive by example by Ken Beck, the one that you have below. I would say that is probably the basic introduction everybody knows, but probably is a very idealized situation, right? Everybody doesn't have this clear green field always. And the last one, test drive development, a practical guides has some examples on how to work with graphical user interfaces and also with real examples. On the recommended content, let's say online, I would say that you have a lot of content here. I put few around how to practice with Java and also with JavaScript, and also main concepts around how to test things, what it means mocking, what it means double, what is the test pyramid, and these kind of things that probably many of us knows, but probably from time to time it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to review it. And yeah, the final recap is basically, I hope I showed you how TDD helps you to develop in a simple, I would say, an effective way. I would say that in the summary, you will see that the components that you're building and the software you're building is better modularized in this way. And I would say that, yes, it's beautiful, this result, but basically it's not so easy to start. So it's difficult to adapt, and also it's sometimes difficult to maintain the practice, no? I think it's worth to try, and at the end, if your software is going to have less bugs, it's going to be easy to maintain. It makes totally sense to try, in my opinion. I'll show you some tips. I hope it makes your life easier in that point if you follow, let's say, the order from top bottom to going up, and also how to do it, let's say, with a particular example. I will recommend you to pair with somebody else, and then if your colleagues already know how to do it, then it will make the things much easier for you. And I would recommend you basically to practice and practice again until you realize how beautiful it is. And yeah, that's was my talk. So I hope it was nice for you. So if you have any questions, that's, I think, time for you.
Thanks, Nacho. That was really great. It was really good information. And yeah, I always wondered like how actually you can start writing test cases before actually having a code, even to like think about that idea. It is always complex, and yeah, you did it beautifully, and give us the way that yeah, you can do it. Although like I still have a the IDs doesn't support it that well. I think we should ask Mala to work with JetBrains and get us a little bit better support for TDDs. I think yeah, that will be really helpful, because yeah, I see like if you don't have any real class writing test cases, you will not have all the advantages of IDs like code complete and all everything. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
like something to improve on. And
Yeah.
yep, I want to pick one question, like I think it is in the chat. So someone, Sushant is asking, like if you are using a custom exceptions, where should we place it, and we should what is the right point where we start refactoring those things? So I think he's asking about the exceptions, custom exceptions, and writing TDDs about exceptions.
Um, well, custom exceptions I understood as a exceptions you can throw, no, when a particular behavior, it is, you cannot follow it, no, and you have to break, let's say, the functionality at this point, or the steps that you were doing, you have to throw something because you don't want to continue next, no. At this point, normally, if you think of it, probably you might think why this is happening, but this is correct for you, for your business. I would say that then you might realize how many points you need to break. If this is more than 2 or 3, I would say that probably this is not the right way of reading the code, because basically you can see many throwing exceptions on a particular method. You might not understand what is happening or why those exceptions are thrown. So in my opinion, you can always verify that those exceptions are thrown in a particular test, or you're having different tests for different exceptions. But once you realize if those exceptions are needed, probably you might think, okay, why I need to do those things, and probably not change that code that doesn't throw too many exceptions, and just try to minimize it, or just use, for example, an error that can help you to understand if there is something that has an error, and then you cannot continue. or otherwise just return as soon as you can from your code. Probably if you have a big method with a lot of cases and you don't want to continue, probably that's the reason because you're throwing an exception. But what if you return at the level you find something that you cannot continue? Probably it is a normal result. And so the point is that, in my opinion, you have to understand first why you are throwing those exceptions. If this makes sense for you, then I will recommend you to cover by test to not break anything. And at this point, just with this safety net, then propose what you can do for those. Probably you can compile an object or create an object that could hold if there is an error, and then you don't need to throw too many exceptions, for example, and then categorize those errors as a different types of errors, for example. And if some error or an error happens, then you can render something or just another component that could use this as a particular example where, I don't know, this exception means this type of error, and then you can map it to another use case, an incorrect use case, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. I think, Shashant, that answers your question. We have one more question from Deb. He's he's asking about his personal experience, and want to cross check with you that when we are using TDDs, like it takes more time to write these test cases, which covers the whole code, or than writing the actual code itself. So, is it true or is it a myth?
I would say that at the very beginning, yes, you have to. I would say, as I said, for example, I spent a bit of time, no, creating those tests for preparing the design that I want, or the design that but the ones that I have it makes me go faster, because if I want to change the signature, if I want to introduce a new parameter, I already have the test that will tell me, hey, Nacho, if you want to do something, be careful because this is already in production and is already working. So if you think in that way, I guess it's gonna, this, in my opinion, is gonna help me to go faster, because if I'm doing something without taking this into account, probably I'm gonna break something and then I have to run, but not because of, not because I did something correct. It's because my boss will come to me and say, Nacho, you did something wrong because something in production is not working. So in my opinion, yes, it is gonna need probably an investing time, no, a bit of more time for building a suite of tests. But the effort, probably you have to take it as an expectation of the middle of long term, that when you have a suite of tests that is working for you, then probably you don't need to do pretty much for changing your code, which is basically the thing. No, we have a lot of code everywhere, but how to change it without no problems, without no danger, let's say, this is the way of one of the ways you can do it, let's say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, if you are catching the test case as early as it can, or like any issues are as early as you can in the life cycle of development, that will save a lot of effort. And if you like add that whole effort, I think you will find like you're saving time, not spending
Exactly.
too much time.
Exactly.
Yep. I think those were questions. Hemant, any questions from your side?
Yeah, I have one question. Is it, I've seen you are directly using the dependencies in the test. So is it good to use Mockito for mocking the dependencies and using it in TDD? Or is it a bad idea with respect to TDD?
Well, this is the practice. Just to explain that the test is gonna be the central part of your let's say the code. So basically, from this perspective, TDD doesn't tell anything about mocking. But when you realize that you need something else, at this point, you have to understand that probably you don't need real dependencies when you're running unit tests, because basically, if not, you will have all your project, right, just for running a particular scenario where you don't need
Yeah,
almost anything. That's why I introduced Mockito, because I normally use it when I'm driving every particular feature in the in
yeah,
the in a project. And when I try to do these kind of things, it helps me to, let's say, okay, I'm going to connect to an API. I don't need to connect to the real API. And probably what I need to do is basically to use something that could demonstrate or just simulate that I'm connected to an API. When the API is going to get me in real production this data, I can just, if the signature is correct, let's say, I only need to demonstrate that the data that is coming is going to be the one that I'm using as expected. So those are the things that I normally try to do in that way, because then I don't need to compile a kind of a tree of dependencies, and it's helping me to drive, my software, my functionality.
Yep. Nacho, one more question. This is basically uh, like if we are writing test cases, like sometimes we dive too deep. Not only that TDDs, I'm talking about unit test case altogether, uh, and we start writing the test cases, the whole scenarios, and trying to integrate everything, and then they become like the functional test, not the unit test. So,
Mhm.
like, do you do you have any recommendations? What is the boundary, like where we should stop? Like, should we go ahead and write all the functional test cases as well when we are writing unit test case, or we should like
Yeah,
write
I
whatever
understand.
we can test?
So I guess you are talking about, for example, a website, no? A website that has a new functionality that wants to be provided by a, I don't know, by different components or different services. So
Yes.
what I try to do normally is try to split the responsibility. So basically, probably the ones that is verifying or building the UI is not the same ones. Probably we can be in the same team, right? This is not the different question. But let's imagine that we are the same team, and the people that are verifying that the functionality is working is the same that are building the backend, and at the same time are building the front end. So at this point, as a team, I normally try to build the user stories that could help us to demonstrate that those things are working. So, for example, from the front end perspective, I guess there will need to create a component that basically gets an information from an API, and this information is going to be rendered properly from the perspective. So this thing it has to be, let's say, in the same way on the backend side. And when I try to do these kind of things, basically try to define the functionality in the terms of the front end and the back end understand the same thing. So basically, the contract around those let's say colleagues are already clear, and the signature of the elements that we're not gonna get and how they're gonna get are already clear. So basically, we try to, let's say, document the things and explain the contract and the request, how we are going to make the request, how the response is going to get, the format of those things, and then the front end and the back end, we are going to work at the same page. And at the same time, we are going to use another UI probably that's going to help us to understand that the functionality makes totally sense when the front end is getting the information from the back end, and at the same time, we are going to render in the element as we expect. So one feature, as you can see, is let's say split it in 3, 4 people, where we are going to build an API for that. We are going to build a front end side for that. We are going to create a component for that, and we are going to demonstrate this with probably a BDD story where everything, when I'm going to go to this place on the website, we're going to see this click and this ID. That is the one that I'm going to get. So four, let's say, different stories, 4 different tasks, at least for building a particular feature. This is something really normal. And in this case, you have to be clear how to run responsible, what feature it makes for things to do at least. So what it means is like one functionality might need to, everything could work in the different areas, like the backend, the front end, you know what I mean? And probably if you need something else from the DevOps or from the IT side, it means also more things to verify from the perspective of, I don't know, deploying something on Kubernetes or all these kind of things. So it makes that one feature, depending on your project, might need to split it in different user histories. And then it makes that for us, might require different unit tests or different behaviors in different components from the backend side, all the cases that you need when retrieving the information in those scenarios where probably the front end give me a parameter that is not correct or is on the format side. We need to agree front end and back end how we are going to handle the errors. But at the end, those are the contract that we need to establish, no, to understand how the information we're going to get from each to each other and how we are going to then render it on the UI. So it's not basically a feature that I can define alone, and that's the business around it. No, it's like and then I can split it. No, as I mentioned, on the different teams, and then define all the different functionalities or just stories in the different places.
Thank you, Nacho. We have another question in chat. So I think it is from what you were explaining, and people want to know, like, uh, is it a good idea to write TDDs for the front enders when we are developing a front end?
Of course, why not? I've been working with teams that were doing front end and using TDD, and basically, you don't need an API working for building an API, building something on the front end side. So you can always use a contract, and if the contract, you can always, there are many tools for that, but basically you can always use a specification of an API and mock it and just run on a server that can mock this API and get it back to you, the response that you might need, for example, a list of users or at least whatever you might need. And the front end should not be stopped by anything. In that case, if the specification is already known, you can always define and build the component on the front end side, and the front end has to be tested as well. So why not using TDD out there? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, same question, but for batch processing applications.
I guess it's the same. Yeah, batch processing is also business, no, where you have to realize that you probably might I guess that is basically the situation where you have a lot of data, no? That's probably one of the main problems around batch processing. But at the end, you are, let's say, running a particular example, a particular query, and then it's going to be aggregated and processed somehow, and then you're going to return it, summarize it to a particular process that probably is going to get this information in a particular place and going to process. So at the end, it's like I'm going to run an input in a particular with particular parameters, and then you're going to get an output, an expected output in a particular way. So this is something that you can run it in a TDD way. Why not? The only thing is that you need to understand the input that you have and the result that you're going to get. But it's exactly the same. So probably you might, as I did, no. In this case, it's a repository. I'm going to get the information in a particular format, and then I'm going to get it back to the service. So this similar thing you can do it in a batch processing. The only thing is that you don't need the full cluster for running those things.
Thank you, Nacho. Thanks for great session and yeah, taking all the questions, being patient with us, like listening to our stupid questions.
No, there are no stupid questions. All are super interesting, and they are really valid because many developers have the feeling that this is not for me. No, this is not applicable for me, even for embedded applications. Why you need to run something on a small device and see that is no, you don't need to do that nowadays. From the 90s was a bit difficult, but nowadays you don't need to let's say demonstrate everything by running it and showing in production. Just take it another way. Just do the specification and then build your code. It's gonna be difficult. I showed with you, but try it.
Thanks, Nacho.
You're welcome.
Mala, you are on mute.
Yes.
That has to happen all the
Yeah.
time. So it's kind of saying what could possibly go wrong when you are live coding? Nothing. So, so the same thing happens with muting and unmuting.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Nacho. Amazing presentation. 10 on 10 for the live coding and 20 on 10 for debugging that the dependency that you were kind of struggling with a little bit, but you managed to do that. So that was amazing. Because
Yeah.
I live code and I know how difficult it could be, even though we smile all the time and we seem to kind of not show the emotions that we want to, but, but
Thank
that
you
was
very much.
amazing.
Thank you very much. Well, my pleasure. I hope you will at some point try TDD and see if somebody else will like to try it, because I think there are some benefits.
And I have one amazing comment by one of the viewers. It was, thank you so much for the amazing efforts. And you explained the concepts really well. You answered the questions even before they were raised. So that is amazing.
Thank you very much. I try to explain what I know. So thank you very much.
So thanks everyone for answering for attending the session, for answering Nacho, for you for presenting the session and for answering all the questions. And for everyone who's viewing the session, please don't miss to subscribe to our channel. The button is right there somewhere at the bottom. And yes, no, not there, Nacho. It has to be.
I don't know.
You must do that the next time you stream a session on your Barcelona jug.
Yeah.
That's a fun thing to do, I guess.
Yes.
So thanks everyone, and stay tuned for our next session. And thanks a lot, and bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Okay.